Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Comics Lair for our discussion of Barbara Gordon's journey. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and the annual Heroes Convention. And I'll put up a spoiler warning right here. We are going to be discussing the most recent developments involving Barbara Gordon. So if you're not current on your reading, you might want to wait and view this panel after it goes up on our Facebook or YouTube, because it'll be there anytime that you want it. But you might want to wait if you're not current on your reading. And I'm your host, Nancy Northcott, and I'm going to ask the panel to go around and introduce themselves and tell us what phase of her life career portrayals Barbara was in when they discovered her and whether they immediately became fans. Michael, let's start with you.
I suppose when I very first discovered her was back in the Batman 66, but I was not a fan immediately. When I really became a fan was Gail Simone's New 52 run. I really particularly loved that internal monologue that Gail Simone did. It really endeared me to the character.
Okay, Stella?
My name's Stella. I think probably I first came upon her in Batman the Animated Series. And I think there was so much going on at that time, just with that series and me being younger, that I probably didn't latch onto her right away. But Batgirl Year One was really where I fell in love with that character. And then I rewatched the Batman the Animated Series and had a newer and stronger appreciation of it. So I would probably say Batgirl Year One would be my gateway into Barbara Gordon.
Okay, Josh?
I am Joshua Lapin-Bertone, and I'm what they call a 90s kid. So I first met Barbara Gordon on Batman the Animated Series. I suspect I won't be the last person to say that tonight. And in the comics, I got to know her as Oracle. So that was like my baseline for a long time and was really how I fell in love with her. I just loved this woman that was in control of the entire DC universe without ever having to leave her desk.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm Steve Sellars, and as far as Barbara Gordon and my relationships were, I'm a little like Mike in the sense that I first ran across her a little bit with Batman 66. It was in syndication when I was really young, so I kind of remember that. But I think I got to know her more with Batman the Animated Series, and then I think I really became a true fan of Barbara Gordon with Chuck Dixon's run on Bird of Prey. That's really when I got into the character. And I have to say, finding out that Batgirl had become Oracle in a way was inspiring to me, because I love how she went through this horrible trauma and then found her way to rebuild herself, not just to what she was, which was what you would think that she would do, but that she basically became the dispatcher of the entire DC universe. And I love that. And that is and when I start to see little hits of that, that makes me happy. And I wish we could see more of that.
Okay, Jenny?
All right. Hi, I'm Jenny Swartz-Levine, and I was a little kid in the late 70s, early 80s, and also, like a couple of the others tonight, saw a lot of Batman 66 in syndication, and I fell in love with her then because of the hair. I mean, redhead girls have to stick together, and so probably after that, a lot of Batman the Animated Series when I was in college, and and then I read The Killing Joke, and well, here we are. So
Yeah. Well, I actually read the $1 Million debut of Batgirl off the newsstand. And I was a geek child. I'm sure you would never have guessed that. And so to see this librarian geek girl become a superhero, it just owned my little girl heart like instantly. And so I have been Barbara's fan ever since. And I sometimes think that where you discover a character kind of affects your view of retcons and other changes to the character. So that might be something interesting for us to think about as we go forward. And for anybody who's watching this who's not really familiar with the character, Barbara's got a big footprint. She's been in more than 3,000 issues of various DC comics. She's been in comics off and on since 1967, has been, as was mentioned, on the live action Batman show, where I just constantly was thinking, could they please let her hit somebody instead of always doing high kicks?
kicks.
And She was played by the late Yvonne Craig in that. There was a brief Birds of Prey show, which I loved, where she was played by Dina Meyer, and she was on the last series of the HBO Plus Titans, played by Savannah Welch. And in addition to that, she's been, as I think Stella mentioned, the animated series. She's been in a bunch of animated series and movies and in games, and there's a Batgirl movie coming. So if you're not familiar with Barbara Gordon, I would really urge you to check her out. So there have been a lot of retcons. First, she was Commissioner Gordon's daughter. Then she wasn't Commissioner Gordon's daughter. She was his niece. First, she was an only child. Then she had a sibling. First, she was on her way to a masquerade party in a Batman costume and saw Killer Moth attack Bruce Wayne. And then she went to rescue him, decided she liked the superhero gig. I think, and Stella, since you mentioned Batman Year One, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that the one where she went to a program at police headquarters, or she was on a tour of police headquarters and a criminal came in and she dressed in a Batman costume and decided to come to the rescue? Do you remember?
From a Batgirl Year One?
Yeah. What did I say?
You did say Batman Year One, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yes,
no, that's okay. Well, there was still a masquerade party in that story.
Yeah, and that's this one, which is a combined issue with Batgirl Year One and Robin Year One. But wasn't she with a police officer at that, like on a date, or he was escorting her or something? But Bruce Wayne was there. And then there's the whole Dick Grayson thing that we'll get into later. So one of the biggest changes in Barbara was 1988's The Killing Joke. And if you are a comics fan, I suspect you've at least heard of The Killing Joke. So let's kind of discuss our feelings about The Killing Joke, and then about the Ostrander and Yale Batman Chronicles #5 that was the origin story for Oracle. Stella, do you want to start us off?
Oh boy. Sure. Yes, I can. I don't even know where to begin with The Killing Joke. I don't like it. I don't like the Joker. Whenever I see anyone post art of the Joker, even though I follow these artists on Instagram, I can't like it because, it's the Joker. I mean, obviously it's the prime example, or a big example, of women in refrigerators. I think we have to toss that out, of course, which is this idea that basically women are victimized or become a victim to serve the story of her male compatriots. And so what happened to her, of course, was to further along Batman's story, as well as somewhat her father's, though he was also a victim in that story. And it was just really unfortunate that they ended up wanting to do that. And I think there's a story that I've been told multiple times, that when asked permission to do this, that apparently Len Wein said, and I quote, "cripple the bitch." And so just to think that we had this amazing character who had some rough patches in the Bronze Age, of course, and to just take her out like that, and I will always look through a peephole because of that reason, is just really, it's really unfortunate. I hate when it pops up all the time with all of these reboots. We always have to revisit The Killing Joke. That's just anathema to me. I don't know why we have to keep doing it. But with John Ostrander and Kim Yale, what they did, they took this really terrible event and they gave it some sort of a purpose, or they used that and thought to themselves, Barbara Gordon's a strong character. She's not going to let this tragedy keep her down. And so they gave her perhaps a better purpose, because just like Josh said, and I think maybe Steve also said it, the fact that she is one of the most powerful, or someone who has her fingers in every aspect of the DC universe. So they were able to turn it around, which was great. They just didn't, it didn't sit well with them, and I'm just ever so happy that they did that. So yeah.
Okay, Joshua.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much building off of what Stella said, Killing Joke, Barbara was a prop, like she didn't have a character arc in that story. She existed to further Gordon's story, to create angst for the male characters. And Barbara deserved better. And, what Ostrander and Yale did was, basically the whole making lemons out of lemonade thing. They took this, bad thing that happened to the character and were able to create an inspiring story out of it, because showing how we don't have to let our trauma define us, showing how, even if you have a disability, you can live your life and find something that you're good at and excel in it and still like succeed in ways that you never thought that you could. That is an inspiring story. And it's very interesting to consider what would have happened had Ostrander and Yale not picked up the baton there. What would have happened with Barbara, with the Oracle Year One story from Batman Chronicles builds off of what they did in Suicide Squad with Barbara, which is where we first saw her become Oracle. But I mean, as a thought exercise, I've wondered, like, what would have happened had Ostrander and Neil not done that? Would Barbara have just been like a supporting character that would have shown up in a wheelchair for every few issues of Batman and then made Bruce feel guilty or made Jim feel sad? Would that have been the end of her, like, basically story as an active participant in the Batman books? I don't know, but I'm definitely glad that it wasn't.
Jenny?
Yeah, just to reiterate what some of the others said, I mean, that Killing Joke story is deeply troubling and problematic. I mean, she's just, even the way that the panels are framed, you can't tell whether she's she's victimized, but we don't even know if she's being sexually assaulted. I mean, there's layers and layers and layers of ick to that are a real problem. And I am so grateful that Kim Yale and John Ostrander decided to rescue her and empower her, because I mean, not only in the way that they did it, but also one of the other things I think that came out of this that is wonderful is there was real representation for people who use wheelchairs and, people that, fight crime in different kinds of ways within, because everybody in the superhero universe, everyone's in fantastic shape and they can, dive and fly and all of those other kinds of things and, leap off of buildings and be just fine. But this is someone who uses their brains to really run the universe here and be as much of a superhero in her own right as everyone else who's a caped crusader.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, it's kind of really hard to add too much to what's already been said, but I will say a few things. If you didn't like the Killing Joke, well, Alan Moore didn't like it either. He's actually
Right.
on record as saying that this is not really a story that he came away with looking back being happy about, and it's not hard to understand why. I think the way that Barbara was treated definitely is one of, I would say, his worst moments. And I think he would probably admit to that as well if you were to ask him. There are elements to that story that, have merit, but it's all to deal with characters that have nothing to do with Barbara. It's all about, Batman, the Joker. Don't even get started about why I hate the Joker, but him, shooting Barbara is one of the reasons. But beyond that, I think everything great about Barbara and the character that she is now is about what Ostrander and Yale, and then later on Dixon and Simone did. That character journey that she went on from the Suicide Squad onto the Bird of Prey, that really is the Barbara Gordon at her absolute best. And it's because I think it does focus on her strength as a character, which is she's the smartest woman in the room. Even among the Bat family, she's one of the smartest people in the room. And being able to apply that in a way where she has to solve a problem. Okay, I cannot solve the world's problems by hitting them anymore. I don't have that ability anymore. I have to rely on other people. I have to rely on my technology, and I have to find a way to be able to do this. And so what does she do? She does what she does with the Suicide Squad, which I haven't read a whole lot of. But more importantly, like, she builds a team. She has agents acting for her, that can go places she can't. And she's able to direct them, and she's able, to find out information about all the bad guys and how they operate. And she's able to disable, all kinds of criminal operations just from her computer, without having to send anybody. And then she helps the Justice League out half the time. Like, most of the time when the Justice League doesn't know where to go, they call Oracle. So, that is where the focus of who Barbara should be. And I think that, they could have had her be traumatized in any number of ways that were not this, and it would have been better. But I think it is maybe an unfortunate circumstance that Yale and Ostrander had to find her what she did, but what they did with her was gold. And I think they turned what could have been a character destroying moment into a character arc that put Barbara Gordon at her absolute best. And you can't make a higher compliment than that, from Yale to Ostrander to Dixon to Simone and so on.
Okay, Michael?
All right, just because I didn't introduce myself earlier, I'm Michael Nunley. I actually I really liked the Killing Joke when I first read it, but you have to bear in mind I basically got into Batman around the Tim Burton movie, and the Killing Joke was the first Batman story I ever read. So that I liked the dark nature of the story, but in no way did the Killing Joke make me a Batgirl fan. I was, you know what I mean? That didn't endear me to the character at all. I really liked the tragic element of the story, but I got to say, hearing the rest of you talk about the perception there of how women are used in the stories like that, it changes my mind on the story a little bit. That I'm not sure I feel the same anymore. But as a general rule, I liked the story itself.
Okay. Well, that story always gave me a squicky feeling. But when Stella said it really wasn't a Barbara story, and then Michael said it was the first Batman story he ever read, it's really not a Barbara story. And I believe there's a line in the Batman Chronicles #5, the Ostrander and Yale origin story, where she says to Batman, "It wasn't even about me. He crippled me to hurt you." And that's the whole essence of the women in refrigerators theory, is that these bad things happen to female characters in order to generate male angst. And I mean, to me, that's kind of a lazy shortcut for writing. I mean, plenty of ways to create angst for people. But picking up on something that Steve said, there's this wonderful story called The Death of Oracle. And it's a 4-part story that overlapped between Birds of Prey and Nightwing, where somebody's trying to kill Oracle, and Barbara ends up actually having to leave her base and go on the run.
I think it was Blockbuster.
Beg pardon?
I think the villain was Blockbuster.
It might have been, I don't even remember.
It was. It was.
But there's a point where, and here's a spoiler, so, if y'all need to go read this, then go la 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 for a couple of seconds. But they fake Oracle's death to throw the bad guys off. And one of the Birds of Prey, I think it's Black Canary, looks at him and goes, "Congratulations, you just pissed off Superman." And that, to me, epitomized the reach that character had. So let me toss a question out there and let's see what you all think about it. Do you think that Oracle in the Birds of Prey was the peak of the character, or would you pick a different period? Josh, you want to start us off?
Oh man, Barbara has had so many highs and lows that it would be hard to find a definitive peak. I would almost say, like, when she was a member of the Justice League around that time in the late 90s. I think I don't know if that went into the early 2000s, but the late 90s, it doesn't get any bigger than that, being on the team. But you can probably look at like other stuff she has done, other heroic things, because a character's peak doesn't necessarily have to be their status. It could be like a moment when she faced down a certain villain, or just a well-written story. So I'm gonna have to kick the can down the road and see if someone else can come up with anything better than that.
Jenny, you want to take a shot?
I'm also going to kick the can further, because I kind of agree with what Josh was said there, is that she's been in so many stories, and there's been so many, I think, things that we could call peaks. And also it depends on who's writing her. I mean, there's a lot to do with that as well. So, I mean, I loved a lot of the Birds of Prey and all of that, but I don't know that I can sort of point to something in particular and go, yeah, that to me is definitive Barbara Gordon.
Okay, Steve?
For me personally, now keep in mind this, for me personally, I would go with Birds of Prey, mainly because I feel like this is where she started really growing. This is where she started really developing into a powerhouse. This is where she joined the Justice League. This is where she was running teams and, running an entire army of agents, more or less, pretty much out of her clock tower, for me. But I mean, you could argue, okay, maybe that's peak Oracle. What is peak Batgirl? Is it, Gail Simone's run in the New 52, which I agree with Mike is very good. Is it, some of the more pre-Killing Joke stuff? Was it the Bronze Age? Is it the stuff going on, now with Infinite Frontier and so on? I think you can make a different case depending on what your favorite Batgirl is or your favorite version of Barbara is, and also, how you see the character. I'm just saying that for me, it would probably be like around the Simone era of Birds of Prey, I would say.
Okay, Michael?
Well, as usual, my boy Steve said it pretty good. But I think really you do have to have that separation, like he said. Oracle was clearly the pinnacle of Barbara Gordon as a character, but when you're talking about Batgirl, it's got to be that the New 52 run with Gail Simone. Her strength. She was going through so much internally during that run. So much was going on with her, and Simone really made that internal dialogue really powerful. That she was able to go through all that and come out of it, like. Plus, there's that really great line in the Death in the Family thing when the Joker confronts her and she says, "You took nothing from me. You took nothing from me." That was just powerful.
Okay, Stella?
I mean, don't you reach your peak once Batgirl gives you a compliment? So probably any of those times. No, I mean, I think if I were to take it creative direction, I think she probably was Oracle. But during those times where she got outside of herself, because I think Oracle, in my opinion, or Barbara as Oracle is often more of a moody and gloomy character compared to kind of a more optimistic and bubbly character, not as bubbly as Stephanie, as Batgirl. But those moments where she really got outside of herself and had more confidence in herself and took Steph and Cass under her wing, I feel like those were really peaks, because I think she was able to tap into something that was really special. And I think it was a lot for her to pass on that cowl, because of course it was in a betrayal given to somebody without her permission, but here to say like, you've earned this and I'll be here to help you out, and to have that team of young ladies. So I would almost say the Brian Q. Miller run, because that was just a really beautiful run with what that team looked like and the women that were on that team, and how Barbara served as a mentor and a mothering character. So just like a creative direction to go with that as a peak.
Yeah, were you referring to the scene? I don't even know which issue it's in, where there's kind of a ceremony where she gives Cass the Batgirl suit?
Or Steph in that particular, yeah, they have a candlelit ceremony. There was certainly that, yeah. And then even with, certainly in Cassandra's time as Batgirl and in No Man's Land, giving that over to her as well. I think those are really special moments, and I think that to give that to somebody, there's no stronger compliment. And I think that was probably really hard for her as well. So I would say that's a peak moment for me.
Okay. For me, I have a problem with some of the more recent incarnations. We'll talk about Burnside in a little while.
Oh no.
But for me, the Barbara who, she was a congresswoman. There was nothing distinctive about that. Her identity as Oracle was unique. She filled a niche that nobody else had ever filled and had huge reach. There's one of the scenes that I put out on Twitter every once in a while when people irritate me is Barbara going, "Mr. President, this is Oracle." And I tweet that panel and go, "Never forget this." So that's just from a purely personal preference standpoint, my favorite. But yeah, she was kind of moody, and she's a little sunnier now than she used to be. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
I really kind of prefer, I like darker stories. I like darker characters, but honestly, I felt like I'll try not to get into the Burnside discussion here, but I really felt like you need that kind of that gloomy, that contemplative Barbara, that with the poppy happy thing doesn't work for the character with me.
Anybody else?
I think that I prefer her with a distinct level of maturity, which we'll get into when we talk about Burnside. I think she definitely has her darker moments, but I think that's because she's been through so much. And so it's kind of understandable that, she wouldn't be quite as sunny as she used to be, and maybe a little bit more like Bruce than she would like to admit. But she's not Bruce as well. I mean, she in varying ways has gone, and butted heads against Bruce a number of times and won. So I would say, while, yeah, there is that element of that, I think it's just a question of her growing, her being older, more mature, and in a role of a mentor. And I have to say, I can't believe I forgot that her relationships with Cassandra and Stephanie, which I agree are excellent. But it took all of that trauma that she went through, all of the suffering and everything she fought through and everything she fought for to become that person. So yeah, I would have to say it's there, but it's understandable.
Well, and there's another point about that mentorship relationship, which is that you don't see in comics, or really in much of any mass media, really strong female friendships. And that's what Birds of Prey was. It was another form of found family. And that's what her mentorship of Cass and Steph was. She was like a big sister to them. And, these are superhero comics. People don't read them for the feels so much as they read them for the action. And so the feels kind of have to be worked in around the action. But I really liked those as feels. And so she was Oracle for roughly, I think, a decade, from something like 1999 to 2009, although New 52 was 2011, so 12 years maybe. And then she wasn't. And Gail Simone, the story has gone around, was offered the chance to write the new Batgirl issue and expressed concern about taking Barbara out of the wheelchair. And, the story that went around on Twitter, so I'll say that as a caveat, the story went around on Twitter, was basically told, well, we're going to do it. And if you don't want to write it, we'll get someone else to write it. And so I think that's maybe where some of that interior monologue that Steve was talking about came from. And so what did you all think when you saw that Oracle was returning to Batgirl? Jenny, you want to start us?
I mean, I understand why, I suppose, because they were redoing a lot of things. But I find a lot of that problematic, because here's somebody who is a real representative for folks who use wheelchairs, for other disabled readers of comics, and then all of a sudden that goes away and you don't get to see that kind of representation in comics. And I get concerned when representation disappears, and that for me has been a real concern. And then also, as we sort of kind of look ahead, and I know we're not talking Burnside stuff yet or some of the more recent stuff, but that spinal implant, I mean, we take it out, we put it in. I mean, it's troubling to me in a lot of ways. So, I mean, Gail Simone's amazing. I don't think it could have been done by somebody in better hands, but it's problematic.
Okay. Steve?
At least for me.
I would say it's the best that could have been done with a bad situation. I feel the problem that I have with the New 52 in general really hit Batgirl, which is it felt to me like certain things were brought back and rolled back so that they could market a character that they felt was more, I guess we should say, saleable. They wanted a Batgirl, they wanted the iconic Batgirl that everybody knew. And so that means that they had to roll back all the character development that she had gotten over the previous 20 years by that point. It's the same problem that the Flash has. It's the same problem that all the legacy, characters from that time had. It's basically, let's roll everything back to, to basics, because we're starting over, and this is what you're stuck with. And while I don't know if it necessarily happened that way, it wouldn't surprise me if the rumor were true, or at least had some truth to it. But I'm going to kind of leave that aside because it is rumor. I will say that Gail did, I think, the best that she could with a situation that was bad. I agree that this is definitely a step back in terms of representation. I don't like that. I feel like they could have found a way to make it work better. I think Gail tried her best. I don't fault her for it. I think the execution was there. But in terms of what she was able to do with that run, I did enjoy it. And because she didn't take away like everything. You know, she tried to keep as much of what was there as possible so that she had that character arc, so that she suffered the trauma that made her grow, which had become part of her character by that time. And then, you know, she tried to acknowledge like a certain amount of birds of prey happened and all these sorts of things. So it was very much a thing that should not have happened. But I think that Gail Simone tried to massage it as best as she could. And we got some pretty decent stories out of it. I like the villains that were in that period. I think that Gail really tried to give Barbara some villains that were uniquely hers, and some villains, you know, that would challenge her more than, you know, a lot of the ones that she's associated with, like, you know, Killer Moth and whatnot. So I kind of appreciated that. But yeah, I kind of, and what's really kind of unfortunate is that even the stuff that Gail tried to do after she left, then really everything started getting ripped away, but I will kind of leave it aside. But as it was, I would say it was the best I could expect given a situation that nobody would have wanted to do. And I think that Gail kind of felt her hands are tied, and I can understand that.
Michael?
Well, I guess I liked the idea of going back to Barbara's Batgirl, but I felt like the character lost some of her depth, cramming her whole history into 5 years. You know, while a couple of years in a wheelchair would be traumatic for sure. That could be something that someone would need to adjust to. Having her in a wheelchair for a decade does a whole lot more. That really allows her time to come into her own and really build herself up as a character. I guess I liked that. It felt a little bit like I guess a step back, but I didn't feel like it was in the wrong direction, I guess.
Okay, Stella?
Thank you for mentioning the 5-year timeline. I wondered if anyone remembered that because I think it's gone now. But yeah, I don't think I put up as much of a stink in regards to this as I would now. I think I'm just at a different place in terms of representation and inclusivity than I was way back when. But I definitely put up a stink just because I thought we had something really special going with Stephanie Brown as Batgirl. And so to lose that was really disheartening for me. And I understood why they were doing it. I think, like Steve said, sales basically. And also, you know, if you think of Batgirl, I think the first person that might pop into your head is Barbara. So it made sense if you're starting the universe over, you're probably going to go with that. The chip did seem ridiculous, and I continued to critique it, especially, when she keeps getting rid of it and putting back in, which just seems offensive, as if, you know, I can turn on and off my disability. I'm sure a lot of people would wish to do that. Apparently, though, a man, I think it was in England, has some sort of chip that has he had a motorcycle accident, and this is very recent. You'll have to check out that thing. So I guess it's more realistic than I originally thought. I seem to be the odd man out, which I'm used to, so that's fine. I did not like that run. I still don't like it. I will say, though, that it is not the worst Batgirl run that I read, having read the recent things. But in my opinion, a Batgirl title should not be as dark as that. I think it can have mature moments, but I think Barbara is, and the other Batgirls as well, a brighter spot in the Batman universe. And I can deal with dark, but with Barbara, I feel like there should actually be some positivity and optimism there. So that was unfortunate to read with all of that stuff that's going down. I think I was really hard on Gail Simone when I was reviewing it during the time, but to learn kind of what she was going through, I think I have more empathy, and I appreciate her trying to save that character, because it could have been way worse depending on who the other person was.
Josh?
Okay. Bear with me because my internet might be cutting in and out. I've been having internet problems with Spectrum for the last 10 minutes or so. Now, can you rephrase the question, because I missed it when you first asked it, so I want to make sure that I'm answering the right way.
Yes, the question was basically, how did you feel about the shift from Oracle back to Batgirl when it happened in the New 52?
At the time, I was very unhappy about it, personally, because like Stella, I was very much a fan of what we were doing with Stephanie Brown as Batgirl. And I felt that having Barbara be Batgirl was kind of going backwards, because, we were doing really well with Stephanie as Batgirl, and Barbara as Oracle was a role that worked for her. Whereas, like, making her Batgirl, she becomes less unique. She's another costumed hero in Gotham, as opposed to the woman that can, like, control the Justice League from her keyboard. And years later, I'm a little bit more of two minds about it, because I asked myself, when you have all of these other characters in the DC universe who come back from, like, being crippled or, like, being killed, it is a little sexist that Barbara is, like, the only character that can stay crippled. So there's that. But then on the other hand, too, representation for people with disabilities is important. So I go back and forth on that. And then, like, you also have to address the Killing Joke, which is, like, is it right to keep Barbara crippled when the story that crippled her didn't treat her well in the first place? We could do a whole panel on that and be here for hours. So I'm not intellectually, I'm not sure how I feel about it. Emotionally, I know how I felt about it back then, and how I still kind of feel about it, which is, I preferred things the way that they are. And I kind of cynically felt that a lot of these people that wanted Barbara back as Batgirl, it was like, that was the Batgirl that they saw in Batman the Animated Series or the 60s show. Like, I would challenge and I would say, like, name one Barbara Gordon Batgirl story that's not like, like, that's not a flashback story, because we had a lot of flashback stories, like the Well Done Batgirl Year One and other stuff. But I was like, we're trying to recapture this time, but do any of these people know what this time is? But as I said it out loud, it seems very, like, gatekeepy. So, I wasn't happy about it. I like how we kind of have more of a happy medium now, where she can be both Batgirl and Oracle. And the writer for the new book Batgirls, I think it's Michael Conrad. I'm not sure. I don't remember his name.
Cloonan.
What was the name, Stella?
And Becky Cloonan. You're right, Michael W. Conrad.
Okay, yeah, and Becky Cloonan. Yeah, they were interviewed by one of my friends, Alex Jaffe, and they asked about Barbara's disability, and they said that they were trying to portray it as, like, like any person that lives with a disability, they have good days and bad days. Some days Barbara can do more, and some days she can do less, because that's what it's like to live with disabilities. Some days you can perform, and other days it's not. It's not going to be consistent, because that's how it is in real life. And I thought that that was the perfect answer. And like Ostrander and Yale, it's them working with what they were given and making, something great out of it. So I look forward to seeing what they're going to do with that.
Well, I really liked the art in that run a lot. And I sort of had mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, there's the representation issue. And I think I've become more aware of that as time has passed. But also I have a sentimental fondness for the Batgirl I first met. And so it was kind of like those two things butting heads in there. And, I really hate heroes fight stories, because most of the time when heroes fight, if they would just talk for like a minute and a half before they start throwing punches, we wouldn't have a fight, which is why they don't talk for a minute and a half before they start throwing punches. And it might have been the first issue of that run. Nightwing comes to check on Batgirl, and they end up in a fight, because he doesn't seem to her to think that she's capable of looking out for herself. And at the end of that fight, he says, it's not that we don't think you can look after yourself, it's because we care about you. And I thought that was kind of a nice little moment in there. And
But they gave him her hair. That was weird.
well, yeah. But in representation terms too, leaving aside the, in my opinion, lamentable butt joke era, Nightwing is one of the most romantic heroes in the DC universe. And he was in love with Oracle, Barbara Oracle, Barbara in the wheelchair. And nobody made a big deal out of that. And that's, I think things are more effective sometimes if you don't make a big deal out of them. It's just like, that's just not even relevant to the calculus in there. So I sort of missed that when it went away. And the collapsing of the Oracle timeline got bigger and bigger. And that's kind of leading us into Burnside, because it was through that run that Barbara was, as Arthur says of Merlin in Camelot, youthened and went to live in Burnside. And that was a radical change for the character. So what did you think about Burnside? What did you see as the pluses and the minuses of Burnside? Steve, do you want to start us?
Oh God, I will say I have not read a whole lot of it. So, people that have read more issues than I have can probably say more. I can talk about what I've seen in tie-ins around that time. I can talk about, how she came across in Rebirth, like that just came after that. But from everything that I have seen, it seems like they regressed her in every way possible. Youthened, I think, is a kind of euphemism for what happened to her. In fact, it not only was she regressed physically and kind of coming across like a college age girl, she was written like a selfie obsessed teenager. And it's like, and every time I would see a post Simone version of Barbara Gordon, I'm like, who is this? I don't know who that is. This is not the character that I remember reading, even in the Gail Simone run. What happened here? So I'm just looking at this as a fan, and I'm just checking out. And unfortunately, like, I can understand wanting to revisit like areas where she's connected to technology, using cell phones and portable technology, things like that. That kind of stuff I appreciate. I don't even mind her costume. Like, I think the purple costume is not that bad. With the yellow cape, it's not that bad. I'm not so sure I like the leathery type stuff, but I like the color scheme. Okay, so elements like that is fine. I think carving out a new neighborhood for her to call her own, like Nightwing did with Bloodhaven and whatnot, and Tim has done in various parts of Gotham. That's fine, and I appreciate that. What I don't appreciate is all of her prior characterization being thrown out with seemingly no explanation. If there is one, tell me, because I don't know that there is one that's been given, to my knowledge. And basically turning her into a character that seems to have thrown out all the lessons she learned as Oracle, all the lessons she learned in Gail Simone's Batgirl. There's being optimistic and sunny and whatnot, which I appreciate and could maybe work, but I think they take it too far. And I'm just sort of like, I think for me, it particularly harms her relationship with Nightwing, because that's really kind of what I've been invested in for the most part. I'm a little bit more on the Nightwing side of things. And from the Nightwing side of things, it just seems like, okay, how is this the same person that Dick fell for? How is this relationship justified? What is it that he sees in her now that was not there before? Because when you change the character, you then have to think, okay, why are these two still a couple? What is it that she sees in him and what is it he sees in her? And I just don't see what appeal the Burnside Batgirl has for Dick Grayson. Like, not at all. So given all of this, I just have to say it's a fail. And unfortunately, there are just too many writers who seem to be wanting to take hints from this version of Batgirl, which drives me crazy, because half the time in modern stories, it's either she's written like Oracle, or she's written like Burnside Batgirl, or some weird combination of the two. And I just don't know who she is, except for the moments when she acts like Oracle. So yeah, I think that this whole period did monumental damage. in addition to what we've already seen.
Okay. Michael?
Well, I guess I just as a comment on what you said there, Steve. I have heard that that the whole Burnside thing was supposed to be like a history, as opposed to actually running into what the character was at the time. And if that is actually true, it makes me feel a little bit better about it.
That doesn't make any sense given what she is written as in Rebirth. She was written almost the same. Yeah.
All right. I definitely felt like it was a huge step back. It was a letdown. I felt like she was a woman in Batgirl, and she was a little girl in Burnside.
Yep.
Okay, Stella?
I love Burnside. I think it's the best run that we've had so far. It's been constant disappointment since then. I think the shell of Barbara is different, but the aspects of her personality and her character are still there. She's still caring about people. She still has good sisterly as well as some mentor relationships with people. She's the technology thing. Yes, I can understand your perhaps against the selfies and things like that. That was a bit strong, but using technology in an inventive way. If she's not going to be Oracle, how can we use technology? The de-aging, I think, is the most negative part of that whole thing. That didn't necessarily make sense. Like suddenly she was just maybe legal. Maybe she just turned 21. I don't think they actually explained that. And that's disappointing just because a lot of her history, you know, being a congresswoman, having her PhD, taking some law tests for funsies, things like that.
Yeah.
Losing that is an unfortunate result of the New 52. And I think it got worse with Burnside. I loved that creative team. I think, you know, part of it is because I didn't like Gail Simone's run. So I'm dark. Weird stuff is happening. Hate James Jr. Why does he keep popping up? Why do we got to do Killing Joke again? And then we have this that seems pretty refreshing. And I think the symbolism of her leaving Gotham, which is basically owned by Batman, coming to her own, coming to a new city where she can be herself, crafting her own outfit is really strong, I think, for that. Whereas in New 52, I think it was 0 year, whatever that was, it goes back and forth between either she decided to be Batgirl as a joke to get at her father, or she's in love with Batman, has a crush on him, ? Which I hate. And so that was one of them, like, oh, she saw Batman, she really respected and wanted to be. I'm like, no, can't she just do it for some other reason? And so for her to strike out on her own and craft her own costume, I thought was really great. Also a really diverse cast. You have Middle Eastern characters. I think Nadima and Kadir was very much like Bond's Q for her, which I thought was great. You have Frankie, her roommate, who I think was not only bisexual, but also had a disability. So even though we didn't have Barbara necessarily, well, she did have the chip, so she does have some issues there. But Frankie is there with her as well, and a Black woman. And with the Nightwing thing, I think there's something going on in behind the scenes with the DC offices that they didn't really want Barbara and Dick to go together. I cannot provide proof for that, but I believe that's something that I heard. And so, of course, they're going to tease us. And that's been going on for a very long time until recently, I would say. So I think that's just a symptom of DC rather than the book. Of course, there were some issues. I think there was some backlash against that transgender villainness that they had. But overall, I thought that it was a pretty good run. And compared to the subsequent runs where she always had to restart herself and figure out who she was, this one was like she knew who she was and she was owning that. And so, yeah. I'm all for Burnside. I'm fine being by myself.
Josh?
So I'm going to sit in Stella's corner of the room and go on Burnside. Burnside, when it came out, it was very refreshing for me because it was after the Gail Simone run, and which I wasn't the hugest fan of, and it carved out its own identity. You know, it's kind of like what I said before, where, you know, like if Barbara's Batgirl again, she's not unique. She's another cape among all the Gotham people. Whereas with the Burnside era of the book, an issue of Batgirl felt very different than an issue of, you know, of what I almost said Nightwing, but at that point he was Grayson, you know, Agent Grayson. It felt very different than the other Bat books that were on the stands. You know, it had its own identity and personality. It was like, you know, Gotham meets Scott Pilgrim meets, you know, like, you know, slice of life anime meets superhero comics. It was a nice little entertaining fusion. Some of the characterizations did feel off, but like Black Canary in particular, she was like,
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. I forgot
yeah,
about
it's
that.
very. Oh, am I breaking up?
No, you're good.
Uh-oh.
No, you're good.
We got you.
You're
good.
fine.
Okay, I'm hearing you say that I'm good. You guys sound like you're breaking up, but I'm going to keep talking, and hopefully it's all coming through. But like, Black Canary was really weird for me. She's like crashing on like Barbara's.
We jinxed it.
We did jinx it.
We did.
Sorry.
Yeah, I forgot that there. Oh, are you back?
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Spectrum, for having poor internet service. I was saying Black Canary felt weird because, like, you know, she's crashing on like Barbara's couch, like she's like, you know, some like sorority chick couch surfing. It's like, you were a member of the Justice League, ma'am. Like you are better than this. But I can overlook some of that stuff if the story is good. And in terms of the characters acting different, when we're with certain groups of friends and family, you know, we all behave differently. Whereas, like, you know, around our work friends, we behave a certain way. Then when we go at home, you know, and we're with our cousins or our parents, we act a certain way. But then, like, if you're a parent or you or someone that cares for children, you know, you act differently around those children than you would around your work friends. Whereas, like, so I feel like it all works. Like, you know, Barbara, the way that she acts around Frankie and around like Kadir is different than the way she's going to act around people like Dick and Bruce. And the way that she acts around Dick and Bruce is different than the way she's going to act around Stephanie and Cassandra, where like she's in a more motherly role there. This was Barbara after going through a very trying time with her brother and, like, you know, him seemingly dying and her mom coming back to her life and then leaving again. So Barbara throws herself into her schoolwork, you know, moves to Burnside and kind of, and I've seen people do this in real life after stressful times, they just embrace that student life and let loose a little bit, which is what Barbara did. And, you know, it kind of works for me in that way. It felt like an evolution of the character. It's not a tone that I think, you know, would work forever, but at the time it was successful enough that a lot of other DC books were trying to emulate it. And there's articles where it says that like editors were saying, you know, do like where they're doing in Batgirl, but you really can't recreate that formula. Next person.
Jenny?
I think I'm somewhere in between the two camps. I loved the look of it. I thought it was bright. I thought it got back to that brightness that I like about Barbara. I didn't like the fact that she got a lot younger and, you know, lost her PhD and then all of a sudden we're back in undergrad. I loved that she kind of got to strike out on her own because it seemed as though she was no longer sort of an appendage in some ways to Batman. She was sort of she had territory that was her own the way that the others did. But I didn't like the Black Canary characterization at all. And I realized that's not sort of the main focus of the book. But Josh was absolutely right. I mean, it was very weird and very strange. I loved the costume, but I loved sort of the diversity of the cast. That was terrific, but it was almost as though Barbara's problems became superficial is the wrong word, but I mean, I was used to seeing in some of the other stuff, her kind of digging into them and addressing them in different kinds of ways. And this was just, there was a lot of bright and happy and poppy all the way through, which was a very different kind of thing than I'd come to expect from Barbara Gordon. So.
Okay. Well, I liked the first half of it better than the second half of it.
Yeah.
I hate the costume.
You're not going to like the film then?
Yeah, probably not. I've seen the pictures. But I like the sleeker look to the original costume. And there again, I'm not sure my expectations aren't shaped by what I first fell in love with. I tend to be like that. My Star Trek is the original series. You know, my Star Wars is Luke Skywalker Episode 4. That's always going to be the first movie for me. So it kind of makes sense that I would gravitate toward a sleeker Batgirl look. The things about that run that really, really bothered me a lot were the youthening, because to me, she became not only young, but callow. She couldn't manage her life. She couldn't keep her act together. And it's kind of blurred into the first part of the run and the last part of the run. And the last part of the run seemed kind of snippy to me at times. And I didn't like making Barbara's persona online that had done so much good into a walking avatar villain, essentially. That just didn't appeal to me. And one of my favorite stories in Birds of Prey is issue number 8, which, you know, good luck finding that. And yeah. And so at the end of that story, Dick is trying to convince Barbara that they should give it another try. And she says something like, do you know why there are no handles on my chair? Because I don't like being pushed. And then in Burnside, she's got a giant automated, all electronic chair. And I was just like, seriously? So there were things about it that I liked. And I think the point about a diverse cast is a great one, because that is another thing that we don't see pains to include a lot in comic books. There tends to be a lot of tokenism rather than a broad spectrum on things like that. So I was not sorry to see it go. I kept the first half of it and got rid of the last half of it, because for me, it was just, you know, I'm trying to be stricter about, am I ever going to read that again? Not one of my fortes. So, well, we've got a few minutes left. And so we can talk about Barbara and the various men in her life. We can talk about Barbara and Dick, because Barbara and Dick go back in one form or another for almost 60 years, and they take up a long time. So actually, let's go around and James Jr., Jason Bard, Barbara and Dick, because we got about 10 minutes left. So Stella, your facial expression is drawing me to you. So
well, I just couldn't believe James Jr. You mean as in discussion topic, which one will we do? I mean, I'm all about, you know, the Babs and the Dick. So you know where my vote is cast.
Interesting way that you express that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, since I think you've just told us where you stand on that, how about the psychopathic brother and the once again confrontation with the Joker most recently? You want to talk to that, or you want to kick the can?
Oh, so we're actually talking about it.
Yes.
The controversial brother, or who?
The last confrontation with the Joker.
Oh gosh, that was one of the worst Batgirl comics I've ever read. So the brother, I don't know. I hate to see him appear. I liked, what was it, Black Mirror? I thought that was a pretty successful story, even though I always have nightmares when he pulls back the blanket and you see the 2 knives and Babs's legs in the wheelchair. If he's dealt with well, he can be, I mean, really frightening. And because of that history with Barbara, I guess it's nice to have him, but he's just overly used, I think. And I think the Joker and the Killing Joke period are also too much used, unfortunately.
Okay, Jenny?
I'm not fond of the brother when he shows up, because, I mean, he's got to be, you know, the dark to her light, and, you know, they all come from I don't really have a whole lot of use for it, but okay. The last confrontation with the Joker, I didn't care for that necessarily either, because yet again, we're pulling out our spinal implant so that we can, you know, sort of fight him in some ways on the rooftop, but we need to do that without our spinal implant. It's just, I didn't care for it. I was glad when that ended. And I'm hoping that we can do other things now rather than just have her confront, you know, I mean, now that obviously the book's over, but when we restart it, I hope that we don't wind up relitigating the same stuff over and over and over again.
Okay. Any thoughts on Dick and Barbara?
One true pairing, as far as I'm
Yes,
concerned.
thank you.
Yeah, yes. So Jason's nice and all, but Jason Bard can, she threw him off the rooftop. Let's leave him there. So,
Josh, you want to weigh in?
I love the throw him off the rooftop, leave him there. That's extreme. James Jr., I feel like he's overused. He needs to be used in moderation. He was very effective in Black Mirror, and everyone has been trying to chase that story since then, and it's kind of all been diluted. I say bring back her original brother, Tony Gordon, who has not been seen since he blew up in a Superman kilt back in the Bronze Age.
Yeah.
You know, he's kind of the Chuck Cunningham of look up Chuck Cunningham. He's the Chuck Cunningham of Gordon's children, and he deserves some love. And okay, so Jason Bard, he was okay as like an alternative for Dick. It's kind of like, but you know, he was never super dynamic. The new version of Jason Bard, like from a post Flashpoint timeline, I don't even know why she would ever entertain like being with him, because he like framed her dad for murder or something. Like, it's like, and every time I would see him like walking around like with her supporting cast, I'm like, why are you not in jail? Like, you are a horrible person. Her and Dick, yeah, it's I got my disco wing shirt on. They are one of the fun will they or won't theys of the DC universe, and I'm glad that we're doing another era of they will, because they've been broken up really since 2006. Yeah. And it was revealed in 2007 in that horrible annual how they broke up, but like since then it's just been like them dancing around. Are we going to get back together or not? So it's nice to actually see them together again. And you made the point earlier in this panel that, like, you know, when Calculator kills Oracle and they said, well, you just pissed off Superman. That is another dark horse in Barbara's love life. When she was a congresswoman, she was set up on a blind date with Clark Kent, and it did not go well. But she could have been Mrs. Superman in another life.
And really ticked off Lois Lane, I'm sure.
Lois had her chance.
Yeah. Michael?
Oh, well, most of my experience with Babs and Dick is from hearing about their relationship from others. As far as James Jr. goes, I don't know, anybody that reads my books or is familiar with me at all knows that I'm a huge horror fan. And so if you put a good psychotic killer into a story, I'm going to love that. So I guess I really appreciated that aspect into Barbara's story. I like how he tormented her and everything. I don't know. I really love the James Jr. character.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, as far as James Jr., I agree on Black Mirror. I think that was probably the best place where I've seen him. I like the idea of him. I like the idea of, you know, Babs having a brother that is out of control and represents everything she's trying to stop. I think that there's some value to that. I think there's some value to the fact that her father feels that he failed his son, and there's also that drama in there. And when it's done well, these are elements that you can play with. The problem is that James Gordon Jr. has been turned into the Joker, at least in the sense that he's that evil psychopath you trot on, you know, the minute that you want to inflict some drama and some pain on her. And I'm just kind of tired of Gotham psychopaths in general, especially of the clown variety. But I would include James to a certain extent in that. Let him rest for a bit. You know, maybe after a while, there's something you could do with him if you have the right story idea. But I think he kind of needs to rest. Jason Bard is a character that I liked in early Birds of Prey, in the sense that, okay, he's the guy from Babs's past who, you know, shows up, and he's a private investigator, and, you know, he kind of plays his own angles, but generally cares about her. And I kind of like that angle. I miss that Bard. I'm with Josh on the New 52 version. I hate this guy. There is no way in the world you would expect Babs to have any interest in this guy, like any version of her. I mean, he's just awful, and he treats her like horribly. It's like, why in the world would she have anything to do with this guy? I mean, so I didn't really care for that. And I'm a big, and as everybody knows, I'm a big Dick and Babs shipper. You're never going to lose me on that one. I'm absolutely on board with that. I just love the fact that, you know, they kind of started off being crime fighters and not necessarily liking each other, to becoming, you know, friends to close friends to best friends, and then, you know, to having the relationship. I felt like the way that it was written in both Birds of Prey and Nightwing in the 90s, that was kind of like the textbook way that you build that kind of a relationship, and it was believable. And so, and every time they try to break it up, and it's always broken up because they want Nightwing hooking up with somebody else, or, you know, they or some other story reason or sales reason or something. And but I'm glad to see that she's back with him. I'm glad to see that she's back with him as Oracle. Like, it's not one of those things where she's back with him, you know, as you know, with the maturity levels dialed down. She feels more like the Oracle we know. And so because of that, I'm like seeing them together the way, at least I've seen them in Tom Taylor's Nightwing, which so far I've really enjoyed. I think that that's a really good run. And so I'm hoping that they keep them together for a while, and that we don't see DC pull another one of those annuals that we don't talk about.
Well, I also loathe, detest, and despise the Joker. I mean, I'm so over the Joker. If DC never publishes another Joker story for 10 years, I'd be just fine with it. I liked the confrontation between Barbara and the Joker in Birds of Prey. And
yes,
I thought that put pay to the Killing Joke. I didn't think we needed to revisit that again. And the whole business with the spinal implant is like, do you understand how hard it is to get through scar tissue? Do you understand how dangerous it is to be screwing around with your spine? And I really don't think you can do it with your fingernails. Really? It just lit all my fuses when they did that, because to me, it was just so incredibly unrealistic, even for a comic book. I mean, we all suspend disbelief. I mean, yes, we'll believe a man can fly, but no. I think James Jr. is an interesting counterpoint, but I think he's been overused. And I think, at least in this recent time, the kidnapping women and dressing them up thing was new and different. I didn't like it, but at least it wasn't a retread of the same old thing that we've done before. And Jason Bard, I could kind of take him or leave him, but this last time, like Josh said, he tried to frame Barbara's father. I mean, I read comic books, I write science fiction and fantasy, but I also write romance. And in any romantic arc, there has to be why this person and not 10 other people, for both people in the relationship, men, women, men and women, whatever. There has to be a reason it's this person. And aside from the sort of alternate reality dragon story, I didn't really get that with Jason Bard. And I saw a lot of, Stella, did you want to say something about that story?
No, I just forgot about that. You're dredging up these terrible memories.
Sorry. Sorry. But, you know, I think I was glad, unlike a lot of people and a lot of friends of mine on Twitter, I'm really glad to see Dick and Barbara together. I'm glad to see her in Nightwing. The thing about her being in Nightwing that really bothers me, though, is Dick has almost been infantilized, because he's diving through the window of his apartment in full costume. And let's talk about how smart that's not some other time. And then he's going in a window at some other place, and Barbara goes, on your left. Dick Grayson has been diving through windows for what, 60, 70 years without somebody telling him to watch out.
Since he was 9 years old.
Right.
Yeah. And it just, I love seeing the Titans, and I love the dynamic among the Titans, and I love the way they were drawn. But Dick knows there's a target painted on his back. He should be arranging for his security. He should not, yes, ask your buddies to come and do it. That's wonderful. That's great. They do it in a heartbeat. Don't always rely on somebody else to do it. And I feel like, in a way, to show how important Barbara is to Dick, Taylor is giving her roles that Dick can perform for himself. And I would sort of rather see her be performing more oracle-y roles in that, rather than being essentially Dick's guardian angel.
I think I can see what you're saying, because we see him away from her and with John, and he starts acting more like a detective in that situation. It's like, oh yeah, this is what's going on, you know, and he's in more of an active, instructive role, which feels to me a lot more like what Dick is at his best, rather than him letting Babs do the thinking for him, as sometimes happens.
Yeah, and you know, in the Dixon run and the Simone run, they really were partners. They complemented each other, and I sort of feel like Taylor's giving us kind of a one-sided relationship, and so, you know, I'm not really keen on that. And something you said, Steve, reminded me of something that Josh had said, and then my brain just went blip and it went away. It's gone. I don't know what it was.
About the detective angle, maybe?
I don't know. It's gone. That happens every now and again, unfortunately. Does anybody want to add anything about something that we haven't talked about? Amplify anything that we did talk about? Add anything at all?
I have a question. I don't know how much time we have, but because we've talked about, of course, the Killing Joke and just the repetition of that story, I wondered if anyone had seen Young Justice, the most recent season, and how they have dealt with Barbara's injury in the flashback, and that Cassandra was involved in that. And I wondered if anyone thought that that was an improvement or had any strong feelings about it.
Looks like Steve does.
Mixed bag. I like what it does for Barbara to a certain extent. I don't like what it does for Cassandra. The problem is that both Cassandra and Barbara are two of my favorite DC characters. So kind of seeing one be raised at the extent of the other, mixed feelings.
Anybody else want to add anything?
I guess one thing I was particularly impressed with, and this was again in the New 52 run there. We've talked about how strong Barbara is mentally, but I mean that beating she got from Mirror in the graveyard. I mean, she's tough as nails too. I mean, it's not just. I like that she's tough all around. You know what I mean, inside and out. This woman can take it and keep coming.
And actually, I did remember what I wanted to say. I really enjoyed the way that relationship between Dick and Barbara was written in the 90s by Simone and Dixon, but that too was a retcon, because we come up on Dick and Barbara being 7 or 8 years apart, and Dick is crushing on Barbara. And then in Batman Family, there's a scene where he's worked up his nerve and she's on the sofa resting, and then he tries to tell her how he feels about her, and turns out she's asleep. Well, that got retconned, so she wasn't asleep, and she just kind of was pretending to be asleep because she didn't know where to go with that. And so the 8-year gap kind of just got hand waved away in that run. And it's Nightwing 37 or 38, I think, that she turns up and they're in her flat and she's got all these defensive systems and they're under attack. And that kind of, they sort of talked about the relationship they used to have that really in no comic I ever read they did have. But they just sort of treated it like, well, this is the way it was, and I walked away from you because, and I thought it worked. You know, it's a retcon, but it's a comic book. We get retcons, it seems like now, about every 6 months.
I mean, in a post-crisis situation, I can accept it if it wasn't dealt with before.
Yeah. But you sort of got a view in that story of why him, why her, other than an adolescent crush kind of.
I love ballistic romance, by the way.
Okay, anybody want to add anything else?
3 reasons why Barbara Gordon stands apart from everyone else in the DC universe.
Okay.
When she was introduced, she had a PhD and was called Dr. Barbara Gordon in the captions. And she also, took the bar and passed, so she is an attorney. And she was a congresswoman. So name 3 other superheroes, or name any other superhero in the DC universe that has the 3 things on. Okay.
And she has a master's of library science, I believe.
Science.
Right.
Okay, well, if nobody wants to add anything else, then we'll go around, and if each of you will tell people where they can find your work or information about your work, anything that you want to highlight, this is the time. So Jenny, we'll start with you.
All right. Well, this has been a wonderful time. So this has been a blast. Thank you for having me on. I can be found on Twitter at Jennifer Swartz2. I can be emailed at Lake Erie College, lec.edu, and I'm the only one with the last name Swartz-Levine in the faculty directory. And up next, I'm going to be presenting at the Pop Culture Association conference in mid-April on Monstrous. So,
Steve?
Yeah, well, yeah, some of it's going to basically overlap with what Mike has to say, but you can find me at Shadewing on Twitter. I'm also, my professional stuff as far as comics, is at Revelation Comic. So that includes basically the entire Revelation Comics imprint of Omen, which Mike will get into, which basically is our creator-owned comics and all of that. Mine is a all-ages superhero book called Blitz. It has a little bit of Nightwing influence, I will admit to that. And yeah, and beyond that, let's see. I'm also writing White Road and Michael Nero for Omen Comics. I am also writing a time travel historical sort of book for Omen called Guardians of the Lamb. And in addition to that, I have a short story that debuted last year in the Perspectives anthology by ASAP Comics UK. If you want to read it, it's up on their website. You'll have to find it. I believe it's asapcomicsuk.com. Just go ahead and search for it, and you should be able to find it. And yeah, we've got some other stuff that's coming up as well, including a number of books that I'll let Mike talk about since I think he'll since one of them is his mainly.
Okay, well, why don't we move right into that? Michael, you want to tell us about that?
Oh, sure. Well, I write Omen, Gallowsman, and I'm also writing. I got a horror comic currently on Kickstarter that is from in Revelation Comics, like Steve was talking about, called Seder, Viking horror comic. You can check it out there. You can find me on Twitter at Michael Nunnele5. And yeah, you can also find both Revelation Comics and Omen Comics on wickedpublishing.net.
Okay, Stella?
I'm still looking for financial backers for my new podcast, Dick Grayson, Best Peach in the Business. So if you want to be a part of that, let me know.
I love that title.
Right up.
Best Peach in the Business. Okay, anyways, hit me up. But in reality, you can find me. You can find me on Twitter at Batgirl the Oracle. I do the Batgirl the Oracle Barbara Garden podcast, which I've been tracing her history. I'm in 2003, which starting in 1967 is quite a feat. And that's over at the BatmanUniverse.net. I do a literature podcast with my friend Tom Panarese called Required Reading with Tom and Stella over at the Two True Freaks Internet Radio Network. And then I'm sure Barbara Gordon has read this, so I think she would approve of you listening to a limited series that I'm doing on Jane Eyre called Dear Reader, a Jane Eyre podcast, and that's over at the Fire and Water podcast network. And you can email me, batgirltheoracle@gmail.com.
Okay, Josh?
I am a writer for a DC Comics official website, not for their comics, just for their website stuff, alas. But maybe one day, we'll see. If I ever behave well enough, they'll let me cross up to the comic stuff. But if you go to DC Comics official webpage, dccomics.com, and click on the news tab, I write a good number of the features over there. In fact, I'm currently working on one about Barbara's father that I'll finish up after I get off of this. And I also do some independent contract work for HBO Max, which involves social media content and those little, like video things that you kind of see like the people doing. For Peacemaker, I did a lot of stuff for their ad campaign, so that was fun. I've been dared to start a new Batman podcast that's currently workshopping, so possibly in the next few weeks, look for the titles are either going to be called Why Batman is a Terrible Boyfriend or Why Batman is a Horrible Boyfriend. We're, workshopping horrible or terrible, which is better.
Can you just call him Bat Jerk? That would solve everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, but Batman is better for SEO. So
I see. That's true.
yeah.
Okay, so did I get everybody?
I think so.
Okay, all right, then we're down to me. You can find information about my books at nancynorthcott.com. On Twitter, where I spend far more time than is good for me, I'm at Nancy Northcott. I'm on a lot of panels on Continual, so right here. My last science fiction fantasy release was historical fantasy from Falstaff Books, The Steel Rose. It's set in the 100 days between Napoleon's escape from Elba and the Battle of Waterloo. And my most recent paranormal romance book is called Renegade Mage. And you can find those wherever ebooks are sold. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us tonight. It's been great fun. And thanks to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information, visit www.heroesonline.com. And thanks to all of you for watching.